You're listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 AM and 103.7 FM KTRC, streaming at santafe.com. My name is Matthew Chase Daniel, and I'm your host every other week. And today I'm talking with Arthur Z. And Arthur is a longtime resident of New Mexico and Santa Fe and is traveled many other places to um, teach and read and write. And he's currently the Poet Laureate of the United States of America, which is a big thing. Congratulations, Arthur.
Thank you.
Um, and you just re-upped for a second term as Poet Laureate. I guess that's the thing that happens. Joy Harjo did 2 terms as Poet Laureate too recently. Is that right?
Yes, Joy actually served 3 years. Her
Wow.
second, the 2-year term, and Joyce, well, my predecessor Ada Limon also served 3 years, a 1-year term and then a 2-year term. But I'm serving two 1-year terms.
Oh, good. So you got it a little easier.
Yes,
I imagine they make you work, get
it
the
is a
word
lot of
out
work.
about poetry for the country and the world, and engage people. And so Arthur has just published a new book, which is called Transient Worlds on Translating Poetry, and it's published by Copper Canyon Press with the Library of Congress as well. And I've just read it the last couple of days, and it's I was saying this to Arthur before we started. It's very serious and also very playful, and I think people are well. One, people are intimidated by poetry because people, especially in this day and age, it seems like people think they should understand everything that they read um, easily, and poetry is in its nature poetic. It moves around, it circles around meaning. It doesn't just give us grammatical structure always that makes us know exactly what we're what the poet is talking about. So in your book, you present original text and then you present different translations of the same poem, and they're all fairly short poems or parts of poems, which makes them more accessible as a reader. And then you have a great little discussion about your take on what the differences are and um, how they did it differently. And so I don't know. That's just my sort of first reaction to the book.
No, that's wonderful. I guess I want to respond by saying it first that the poet laureate, the U.S. poet laureate, is asked to champion poetry, to find a way to increase the appreciation of poetry. And in my case, I learned how to write poems, how to craft poetry through translating ancient Chinese poetry. And I taught for 22 years at the Institute of American Indian Arts.
Hmm.
And during my time there, I found, as you just said, um, students, people would approach poetry with trepidation, with the idea that, oh my God, poems are difficult, they're hard to understand. And if they had to write poems, they were also equally uptight, like, oh, it has to be really deep, it has to rhyme, it has to have meter. And one of the ways I found to loosen Native students up and just to get students to play with language was to have them translate poems. So they weren't feeling like, oh, they had to write their own original poems, but they could take a text from ancient China. And when I showed them that there were maybe 3 or 4 different translations to look at, and no one translation was necessarily better than another, that there was no correct way to do this, but they could engage creatively with their own vision. They got very, very excited, and the class I designed became instrumental in enabling a whole younger generation of Native poets to emerge. And then as the US Poet Laureate, I thought, well, why not take this on a more global scale and bring in poems from different languages? The book Transient Worlds has 23 poems from 13 languages. And I wanted to put them into conversation with each other. Again, not to say one language is more important than another or one translation is more important, but I've got a poem in Navajo, I've got a poem in Mayan, I've got poems in Chinese, Arabic, French, Spanish, German. It's a motley crew, so to speak, and it was really a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah, it's really as well as being about translation, it's about poetry from all over the world and different approaches to poetry. And um, it's easy, I think, as people who are native English speakers, and English being such a dominant language on the planet, to forget that there are so many languages and so many, and think that everything English is sort of, it is dominant language, but
Right.
that
Right.
it is the only language we need to think about or worry about or understand. I personally find it really, I love language and I love other languages, and I speak French well and I speak Spanish poorly. And, I spent 2 weeks in an arts residency in rural Netherlands. So it was all Dutch language,
Oh,
Nederlanden.
wow.
And I didn't speak any, but I was fascinated to try and follow conversations. And I found like I could take what I knew of English, French, Spanish, and Latin and biological Latin terms, Linnaean terms. If I took the English and I subtracted out all the Romance language, the Spanish, French, and Latin, maybe that word worked in Dutch, because it's a Germanic language and English is this blend with a lot of German stuff in it. And it was an odd way to try and communicate, like the word cheese sound, is Kaas, which is similar to cheese in English, but very different from fromage or queso or things like that. So
Right.
um,
Right.
I find it inspiring to understand languages and um, like I don't know. I'm sort of rambling around, but like there in French, the word for avocado and the word for lawyer is the same word, avocat, and they come from different roots. One comes from Nahuatl, Aztec, aguacate into Spanish, and then into French, avocat. And the lawyer word comes from like an advocate. It comes from a Latin word. But somehow they come together in French as the same pronunciation, the same spelling. And so if you're translating from French to English, does the word avocado now have a different meaning that's untranslatable somehow?
Right. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating. And I think of my book as fundamentally a celebration of language itself. And I mentioned that the word translate comes from Old French and then Latin to bring over, to carry over. And English is a composite language. As you said, avocado comes from Nahuatl. I could go on and talk about how ketchup comes from China to Malaysia to England to America, and it starts as a fish-based sauce and ends up as a tomato-based sauce. And it's just fantastic the way languages move. And in my book, I'm glad you thought of it as inviting, because one of the things I want a reader to do is, well, I'm really trying to blur the boundaries between reading and writing and making translations and writing poetry to show that all of these aspects of language all come together. So if I present a poem in ancient Chinese that I do in the first zone, I present a crib so a reader who doesn't know Chinese can see the words in English under each Chinese character, and then they can see three different translations. And then I can talk about how each translator found something of value to carry over. And then the innovation I'm excited about is I then turn to the reader and invite the reader to make their own translation. I want the book to be a source book that isn't just something you read and are intimidated by, but you read and you get ideas for your own writing. You could be a
Yeah.
fiction, nonfiction writer, and you could say, hey, I can have fun with this. I can do this.
Yeah. We have to go to a break. We'll be right back. My name's Matthew Chase Daniel. I'm talking with poet Arthur Z. About his new book, Transient Worlds on Translating Poetry. We'll be right back. You're listening to Coffee and Culture. So I'm talking with our U.S. Poet Laureate, Arthur Z., longtime teacher at IAIA here in Santa Fe. Also, were you like a traveling resident poet in schools, like in grade schools early on in the maybe 70s or 80s through the state?
Yes, for the first 10 years that I was in New Mexico, I worked as a poet in the schools that was funded by the New Mexico Arts Division. And that was over 50 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And coincidentally, Joy Harjo was also one of the poets working in the same program.
Oh, nice. I saw a photo maybe last year. Someone showed me a photo, and it was you and Joy Harjo and John Brandy and Harold Littlebird. And I don't know, it's an old photo, maybe from the 70s or the early 80s. And I was like, wow, I know all of those people. And two of them are poet laureates of the United States. Like, does that mean John's next? Or, uh,
Yes, that photo was after a poetry reading at the Socorro Public Library.
ah,
I believe it was 1977 or 78.
Yeah, nice. Nice that all this old stuff weaves its way into the future and the present uh, in different ways. I don't know. It feels like
Yeah,
a
so
nice continuum. Um, you write in there, if a translation sounds like a translation, you have failed in your effort. A good translation appeals to our ears, eyes, and heart. Um, And so there's like a musicality. And then something else you mentioned is in Italian, this phrase, uh, traduttore, traditore, which is translator, trader, um, um, which sound the same. And that there's this difficulty in moving from a language to another language, and how, as a translator, how much freedom you have to make it literal or to take a similar concept or analogy rather than translating it literally, translating it um, into something that has meaning for the English reader if we're translating into English. And the other thing I was wondering about is like how much, how important it is for the translator to either be fluent in the ending language in English, if you're translating into English, and or in the original language, or in both. Do you need to be fluent in both? Do you need to be fluent in English to translate into English? Could you be fluent in French but not really know English? And, what are your thoughts?
yeah, this is endlessly fascinating. I think we could talk for hours about this. So let me start with just the Italian phrase traditore, translator, trader. I think for any translator, there's a recognition of an immediate sense of loss. If you're looking at a classical Chinese poem, which is tonal, the poems were originally chanted. If I'm translating a poem from Chinese to English, I'm immediately aware of loss. There's no way I can convey that sound and rhythm into English. The languages are so different. The Chinese verbs are tenseless. They're all existing in a sort of omnipresent and omnipotent present tense. And
Mm,
English allows to do, I have seen, I will see, I am seeing. How do you do all of that? Chinese rarely inserts a subject into the poem. It would be presumptuous to put an I into the poem where you say, like, I see or I do. And with English, we need those pronouns all the time. So it's endlessly fascinating. I guess I want to say that when I'm translating from Chinese to English, I have to personalize the language. I have to write out the characters one by one in a particular stroke order and direction. So I'm feeling the language in my own hand and in my own body. And that helps me deepen the experience. So I'm not just reading on the surface saying, oh, here's a phrase, how do I translate it? I'm actually trying to think about how did the poet come up with this configuration of language?
Hmm.
And then you have that issue, like you're saying, do you try and be literal about it? Do you try and just be more figurative or looser? In one zone, I have two different translations of a famous poem by Pablo Neruda, Solo la Muerte. And the Donald Walsh translation, literally line by line, as I say in the book, is very accurate. And yet, when you put all of the pieces together, all the lines together, the translation is somehow lifeless. It's like, wait a minute, what happened? And then the other translation by Robert Bly, who is, of course, a well known poet, takes liberties with the Spanish, and maybe it takes a little time to get going, but he puts a kind of pressure behind the voice and makes it alive that ultimately I think makes the translation more engaging. So I do believe a translation has to have a compelling voice, a fresh voice, and a reader needs to feel that sense of urgency behind the language. If you're just literally trying to translate word for word, oftentimes that's a disaster. And
Yeah.
then the other issue you raised, how well do you need to know the language? I always feel like, say, with Chinese, there's always someone else who knows the Chinese better than I do or ever will, because my Chinese is rudimentary. But I am a poet, and I feel like one of the things I can do is try and make the translation vivid and alive. And know that our language is always changing. The translation may only last for a short amount of time. That's why I call the book Transient Worlds. Translations are ephemeral. But if we can make translations that are engaging, that speak to us here and now, that's quite an accomplishment and quite a gift. So in one zone, Carol Moldau doesn't know any Russian, but she talks to Irina Ross, who lives here in Santa Fe, who's fluent in Russian. And Irina records the Russian. Carol has the sounds. They go through line by line, phrase by phrase. And Carol makes a translation that is really wonderful. And at the end of that zone, I tell the reader, reach out to a family member, a teacher, a friend who knows another language and make a translation as a collaboration.
Hmm.
Translation can bring people together. Writing brings people together, and we create a whole community that way.
Yeah. I like your saying that you write out the characters as a to get in that mindset. I think some writer, I forget who, maybe a novelist, like typed all of some famous other novel that he was very inspired, and he just sat in front of the typewriter and copied the whole book to sort of get more into it. And you say that like translating is the deepest form of reading. Um, and anyway, I like that.
Yeah, I guess I want to respond to that because, we live in such a fast-paced world. We're skimming all the time, whether it's the internet or, on our phones or news. And if you're translating, you have to really slow down and deepen and think about, well, why did the poet choose this word and not another? And why this configuration of language? And how did that image come about, or how did that sound or musicality come about? And then it's really deepening and slowing the process down. You can't speed read a poem. If you do, you're cheating yourself. You're not
Yeah,
really experiencing. The ideal way is to say the poem aloud, to hear it in your own voice and body.
yeah,
And that requires time and patience. But then it allows us to change our attention. It deepens our attention. And so that's something I hope that's valuable that this book can help with.
yeah, yeah. Was there a poem in there, or maybe I watched a video? Oh, it was the poet laureate of England, who you did a talk with, of the UK, and he had translated Gilgamesh, and there's a portion in there where he's reading, and he's the hero, Gilgamesh, is going through this tunnel to the
Right,
realm of the
right,
gods, and it's
right,
like the same line over and over and
right,
over and
right,
over and over,
right,
and then
right.
eventually it changes a little bit, and then a little more, and then he emerges from the tunnel, and it's so experiential, like what you're saying. You can't skim that.
Right,
It
right,
it's like
right,
that old joke, knock knock joke, where knock knock, who's there? Um, banana, banana who? Knock knock, who's there? Banana, banana who? Knock knock, who's there? Banana, and then knock knock, who's there? Orange, orange who? Orange, you glad I didn't say banana? You know,
right,
it reminded me of that. So we have
right.
all
Yeah, wonderful.
these associations that come with stuff. And I like the way you're saying that these translations are temporary, they're transient, and you're whoever's doing the translating are bring them across language, but also across time and
Right,
things that make sense to us now. And in 100 years, the translation that happens today may not make as much sense as something that was translated will be translated then. Um,
right. And I think that's actually a good thing. That language is always changing, or vocabulary or syntax, the way we speak is always changing. So
sorry,
translation.
we got to go to a break. I'm going to interrupt you. We'll be right back. We're back with Arthur Z, Poet Laureate of the United States of America. He's going to be speaking at Collected Works on Tuesday, June 30th at 6 p.m. about his new book. And he'll be in conversation with Ryo Yamaguchi, who's the publisher and executive director of Copper Canyon Press. So I'm sorry I interrupted you before, Arthur.
Okay.
I don't,
Well, so yeah, I think the the approach to translations hopefully enables a reader to engage. I want it to be very hands-on. So, readers invited to not just read the translations and say, okay, I read them and put them away, but to then be active and say, oh, okay, what if I try and do a translation? And there was a friend of mine who was recently on a flight from Honolulu to Seattle. She'd never written a poem before, never translated a poem. She's stuck in her seat, right? And she looks at my book and she reads his own, and she read the first one, and it says, you're invited to make your own translation. And she thought, well, I'm stuck in my seat. What the hell? I'll try and translate this ancient Chinese poem into English. And she was so excited when she landed in Seattle. She said, I made the first translation, the first poem I've ever made in my life. And it's changing how I look at reading poetry and experiencing language, because I was just always thinking of poetry as difficult. And now I'm making my own translation and I somehow feel empowered. She was ecstatic, and
yeah.
it was a wonderful story.
Yeah, that's liberating. That's great. I found in reading there's this Aimé Césaire, um,
Yes.
French-speaking Caribbean writer,
Black. Yeah.
and I really enjoy. I had never heard of him, and but I really enjoyed it, and partly because of just the way it was written and translated, but also because I speak French, and so I can more easily jump into the process in the book.
Right. Right.
And one thing I noticed in the translations and in my own understanding, it says there's a line, avec un mot frais, on peut traverser le désert. With
Mhm.
a fresh word, one can cross the desert. But for me, the word frais, um, well, there's fraise, which is a strawberry, so it's fruity and fresh to me. And this is just like my own idiosyncratic understanding of French, because I'm not a French speaker. But so frais to me means fresh, but it also means refreshing. Um, in a certain way. And so to me, it's more like if there's something lost in with a fresh word. It's like a refreshing word. You can cross the desert because you need
Wonderful.
water or
Wonderful.
something. And
Right.
I was like, oh, I could do better than this one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You should make your own translation. Great.
Yeah. And then there was all sorts of words that, and other things like another line in that, Il m'arrive de dessiner un mot sur le sol. Um, which is maybe translated as sometimes I draw let's see, where is it? Sometimes I trace a word in the dirt. But the il m'arrive means it arrives to me. It does mean sometimes, but it's a weird turn of phrase. I mean, it's a common turn of phrase, but every time it's like it's something coming at you from exterior.
Right,
Like I'm
right,
just there, and all of a sudden I'm drawing in the dirt without
right,
having thought about
right,
it, um,
right.
which is different than sometimes. So, um,
Yeah, it's endlessly fascinating. And there's that issue of is the dessiné to draw literally it is, and the translator chooses trace, which is an
right,
interesting decision. And so all of, the semantic range of each word and the context becomes super interesting. And Kareem Abu Zaid, who translates from Arabic into English, talks about how it's difficult because, again, in Arabic, there's such a wide semantic range. How do you choose a particular word you choose? And so, even you or I could do multiple translations of the same poem. That's
yeah,
a whole, I didn't really have time to explore, but it's fascinating to think about the choices and the implications of language.
yeah. Here in northern New Mexico, the Spanish word ojo means eye in Spanish everywhere, but in northern New Mexico particularly, it also means a spring. Like Ojo Caliente is a hot spring, or Ojo de la Vaca is a spring up where the people raise cows and on the mesa. Um,
Right, right.
and I don't know. That just as I read your book and as I took a bath this morning, getting ready to talk to you, all the stuff is like popping out in my brain. Like in English, the word read the color or I read the book. They sound the same. All these things that, and every language has its own set of these. Um, what's your, in terms of your language, you grew up speaking English and Chinese at home, or?
Well, that's an interesting question, and this wouldn't happen today. But my parents were immigrants from China. I grew
Mhm.
up, was born in Manhattan in New York City. Grew up in Queens till I was 6, and during those first 6 years, my parents spoke a lot of Chinese in the household. And then this is what wouldn't happen today. The school actually called my parents. I have a older brother who's 4 years older, and the principal told my parents, "Gee, it's great you want your kids to be bilingual, but they're falling behind in English." And my parents panicked and they're like, "Oh my God, we're immigrants. We're in America. Forget speaking Chinese. We should just assimilate, learn English." And so that happened, and my Chinese was cut off. But
Oh,
when
wow.
I started to write poetry, I was at the University of California at Berkeley, and I was taking conversational Mandarin every day. I was learning the characters. And for me, the language was coming very quickly because I knew the sounds, I knew the words from early childhood, but I didn't know how to read or write them. But when I
Hmm.
learned to read or write them, I could say, oh, I know how to use this character. So it went very quickly for me. So, but it was a form of recovery, really. And then translating the ancient Chinese was a deeper way to sort of tap into that artistic tradition.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating to have it and lose it
Right.
and then and then make an intention to learn it again and doing
Right.
those
Right.
translations as a way of engaging in it. Um,
I guess I
but
want to come back to that idea of translator trader that you raised. If you just think of translation as like, here's a bound text, how do we carry it over? That seems impossible. You betray it. But if you think about all the rich implications that we're coming up with, like from the French, if you think of translation as being a creative act, a humanizing act, and a possibility of discovery and renewal and even transformation, then translation becomes intensely exciting. It's not a passive thing where you're taking a text saying, how do I just carry it over mechanically into another language? You're having to think creatively, not just how do I do this? What can I learn from this? How does it nourish me?
nice. Um, I noticed with some translations, like there's a translation of the Tao Te Ching, and I think you have two or maybe three
A
different
fourth
translations.
translation.
Four.
Yeah.
And I read them all and I was like, no, 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 no. Because as a teenager, I got a copy of a book of a translation, which is this one,
Oh,
um,
yes.
which
Yes.
was very
Uh-huh.
popular and out in the world and was very inspired by it. And so for me, having had that imprinted on me as a young person, I was maybe 16 or something, um, and reading it and rereading it, it's like that's it. To me, it wasn't translation; it was that. And so when
Right.
I read a different translation, I'm like, it's like when you get a I used to listen to records, LPs, and they would have a scratch in this certain part of this one Van Morrison song. And then I translated to CDs and streaming and all. And for years, whenever that Van Morrison song got to the place where the scratch had been, I would be like, wait, what's wrong? Because it's not there. The imperfection
Great.
wasn't
Yes,
there.
that's great.
And it was similar with the Tao Te
Uh,
Ching and with the
right.
Song of Solomon too, which
Right.
I knew portions of from a Passover Haggadah that my
Uh-huh.
family used when I was a kid. And so it's also, they become different versions. We ingest them and they become part
Right.
of us and personal to us in a way.
Right. Right. Yeah. How wonderful.
One thing I think is when, as a writer in poetry or as a painter or sculptor, we make art, we make a poem, we translate a poem, and then we put it out into the world for others to see or to read or to listen to. And there's a certain letting go where the person who is hearing it or reading it or seeing it completes the work in a way. Um, and I think that's an important thing that we have to let go. Like the meaning, we might have an intended meaning and someone might see it and take a whole different meaning. And that's okay in a certain way. You're listening to Coffee and Culture. We're back talking with Arthur Z.
The French poet Valéry said he never finished a poem, he only abandoned them. And
Uh-huh.
the idea he just got to the place where that's it. I have to let it go. I have to it's what it is. And I agree with you. The reader sort of completes it in a way. And ideally, by reading the poem aloud and feeling it in your own body, it's sort of like you feel the sound, the rhythm, the spell of the language. And you can't do it just by skim reading on a page again. But when you feel in your body, then you're completing the poem.
Yeah. Um, I think there was a French painter, I forget who, maybe turn of the 100 years ago or more, um, who his work was collected at the Louvre, and they would often find him in the galleries at the Louvre doing more work on the painting.
That's great.
Same sort of thing like Valerie. Uh,
Right.
uh, I had this theory, and you, as someone who's aware of language, might have thoughts on it, which is like if you go to southern France near Nice and Monaco, near the border of Italian, the French is different there than it is in Paris or in northern France. And it's maybe more similar to Italian because that's the next thing, and that these borders between this is French and this is Italian and this is Spanish, whatever languages, have evolved over time. And like maybe there were more different dialects in the past and more slow transitions from one language to another. Like just I don't know the history of, I mean, I've heard of the Tower of Babel, but I don't know the history of how language came to be. And it's sort of fascinating that.
Yeah, I think the way language sort of diffuses and evolves and evolves in different locations is endlessly fascinating. I mean, obviously Spanish in Argentina or Bolivia is different from, Castilian in Spain and Portuguese in Brazil, I'm sure, has all sorts of idiomatic expressions that aren't in Portugal. And so the way language sort of moves around. And I guess I want to pick up on, you mentioned the Song of Songs. In that zone, I have a passage with the Hebrew text from the Song of Songs. And here's a Mayan poet. This was a discovery to me. It blew me away. Here's a Mayan poet who is writing poems in Tzeltal, the Mayan language, translating them into Spanish. And then Michael Wiegers translates the poem from Spanish into English. And the translations sound like they're coming out of the Song of Songs from Hebrew. And
Yeah.
to me, it's like a Hebrew root, a Mayan, a Spanish trunk, and a Mayan leaf. It's sort of like, it blows my mind that all of these languages are interconnected. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Buffalo Conde.
Yes,
That's the name
he's
of the.
a Mayan poet, and when he writes, he uses a pseudonym. He feels like he's possessed by a different persona, and
Uh-huh.
so then he uses Buffalo Conde. And there are no buffalo in Chiapas, so that's part of his persona, that he's somehow an outsider, that he's channeling from somewhere else.
That's amazing. Um, I just in the book you rather than it being a series of chapters, you call them zones. What is talk about what that means to you?
Sure, and that is indebted to, since you know French, the French poet Apollinaire, who has a terrific long poem called Zone. And the speaker sort of wanders all over Paris, and it's very much collage and juxtaposition. It sort of moves anywhere and everywhere. And as I was assembling the book, I thought, what is the structure to it? I've got poems from many different languages, and I don't want to make a hierarchy and say like English is more valuable or Spanish is more valuable. I want to celebrate all the languages for things they can uniquely do. And I thought if I do chapter one, two, three, then chapter eight is going to have the appearance that it relies on chapters one through seven to get to eight. So I said, I don't want that because it's nonlinear. Each zone is a celebration of language, an exploration of translation. And I thought of Apollinaire's poem, Zones, where you're moving through space and time. So I called each one a zone in honor of Apollinaire, and they're interpollinating. So if you like surrealism, you could look at the Neruda poem, and then you could look at the Césaire poem uh, in French. Or if you like Hebrew, you could look at a poem from ancient Greek, Sappho, and you could look at a passage from the Iliad. But then a British poet takes that passage and she, quote unquote, excavates it. Alice Oswald takes a list of warriors in the Iliad who are named and who are killed, and she writes an original poem excavating the Iliad, creating backstories for these Greek warriors. It's endlessly fascinating to me. So I wanted the sense of interpollination, of surprise, of juxtaposition. And so for me, the zone was the way to do that.
Nice. Yeah, it's very and I think you say in the introduction, like, don't feel like you need to go through this whole thing chronologically. Jump around, take what interests you. It's very freeing as a book and in a really nice way. You sort of stretch the legs of what we think of as
Right, right,
translation and
right.
allow people to do it their way. It's really wonderful. I just want to say again that Arthur Z will be in conversation with Rio Yamaguchi at Collected Works here in Santa Fe on Tuesday, June 30th at 6 p.m. You can go to Collected Works website to find out more about that, or just show up, I believe. And so you're not you're doing this poet laureate thing. You're not teaching at IAI anymore. You're not the traveling poet in the schools. So um, how what's coming next, and what are you writing a lot? Or are you distracted by being poet laureate, not able to write?
Right. Yeah, no, lots of questions. So I assembled this book with it and published it within 1 year, which was pretty amazing.
Wow.
I assembled and wrote the book in just over 3 months but it's a lifetime of working as a poet and translator. So I was able to put it together quickly and have it come out in time for my conversation with Simon Armitage, which marked the end of my first year as poet laureate. And I didn't know if I would just serve a 1 year term and that would be it. That's
Right.
why I wanted the book to come out then. And then the library asked me to continue for 1 more year. So one of the things I'm going to do is take this book to different cities and do evening events where there are celebrations of poetry and translation. And as part of the component, I'm working with Queens College in New York City, which has an MFA program in translation. And Kamiko Han, the State Poet Laureate of New York, and I are going to choose 4 graduates of the translation program. And they're going to take this small book and do poetry translation workshops in the cities that I go to. So it's a way of really circulating the book and, again, breaking down the idea that poetry is difficult and that it's isolated, that anyone can come and try their hands at this. And so we will be going to different cities celebrating poetry using Transient Worlds. While that's going on, there are some things I'm doing as poet laureate to champion poetry. I was just on Sunday in New York City leading a poetry walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, if you can believe
Oh,
it,
that sounds
with
good.
300 people, sponsored by an organization called Poets House. The walk was free, but I was part of the lead to the walk, and we literally walked from Manhattan over the Brooklyn Bridge to Brooklyn. And when we got to Brooklyn, we went to a site where Walt Whitman used to take the ferry between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and he wrote his great poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, there. And I
Right.
read the last section to Whitman's poem. And I'd never walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. It was really exciting.
Yeah,
And then
I've done
standing
that.
were
Is that
told,
right at the end of the bridge where the ferry used to go there?
yeah,
By
kind
the
of go
river
down.
house down there?
It's called Jane's Carousel now. There's
Mhm.
a modern carousel, but I couldn't believe it. I got up to read the last section of Whitman's poem, and it was sunset, just like it was in the poem. And I looked at the water, and the tide was coming in, just like it's in the poem. And so, what a thrill to read the last section of Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry is a way to celebrate poetry to a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
doing
back
things
in
like,
your hometown.
right. So I'm
Yeah.
doing things like that, and then I'm traveling a lot doing readings of my own poetry as well.
Well, that's wonderful. We're out of time, but I've so much enjoyed visiting with you, and um, everyone come out and hear more of Arthur speaking on poetry with Rio Yamaguchi, Tuesday, June 30th, 6 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right.